The desert winds of Emesa whispered through the narrow streets, carrying with them the scent of sun-baked stone and incense from the temples. Here in the heart of Roman Syria, a boy was born into a world of power and shadow, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, though few would know him yet by that name, entered life under the heavy eyes of the Severan dynasty. His mother, Julia Soamius, delicate but shrewd, watched over him as if the boy's every breath carried the weight of empires. His father, Sextus Varius Marcellus, a man of rising influence, remained in the background, a silent pillar in a household ruled by ambition and devotion to the god of the mountain, Elagabal. From an early age, Elagabalus was not merely a child, he was a priest. The black stone, the beetle that represented the god, sat in the temple like a sentinel, silent and eternal. The air inside the sanctuary was heavy with smoke, the acrid sweetness of burnt offerings clinging to skin and hair. Young Elagabalus, barely able to hold the weight of the ritual, would circle the altar, his eyes fixed on the god's dark presence, while the priests chanted, the rhythm of their drums vibrating through the stone floors. The politics of Rome, distant yet omnipresent, would soon touch him. His grandmother, Julia Mesa, a woman of fierce intelligence and subtle cruelty, recognized opportunity where others saw only a boy. After Caracalla's sudden death and the brief, fragile reign of Macrinus, she saw the chance to thrust her grandson into the epicenter of imperial power. At 14, while most boys played in the sun-drenched courtyards of their estates, Elagabalus was proclaimed emperor, a move orchestrated with whispered lies and the careful manipulation of soldiers' loyalties. As the 3rd Legion Gallica, stationed at Rafana, swore allegiance not to Rome, not to tradition, but to a boy whose face bore the promise of a god, Mesa's whispers, repeated and embellished by his mother, spread like wildfire, that Elagabalus was the illegitimate son of Caracalla, the rightful heir to the throne. As dawn broke over Syria on 16 May 218, the sun rose over a world that would soon tremble under the footsteps of a child emperor. Letters would later reach the Senate in Rome, penned with trembling ink on parchment that smelled faintly of wax and dust. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus assumes the throne, they read, a statement of fact and a challenge to centuries of Roman tradition. Soldiers and senators alike were forced to navigate the tension between duty, fear, and fascination. And as the boy emperor's name echoed through the colonnades of power, a shadow loomed over the ancient city, a shadow that would stretch far beyond the mountains of Syria. The battle that secured his reign was swift, yet the memory of it would haunt the annals of history. Macrinus, unprepared and overconfident, underestimated the boy and his legion. The clash at Antioch was not merely a fight of steel and shields. It was the collision of old Rome with a new, untamed force. When the dust settled, the soldiers of Macrinus lay scattered, their loyalty shattered. Macrinus himself would be hunted across the empire, his head severed and presented as a grim trophy to the young emperor who still smelled of incense and youth. Elagabalus, now emperor in name and in blood, did not yet step into the streets of Rome. His power was a promise, a slow-burning fuse in the hearts of those who watched him from afar. Coins bore his name, titles and honors were claimed in his youth, and yet the city of Rome, with its shadowed forums and whispering senators, awaited his arrival. And in Emesa, the boy priest still circled the altar of his god, unaware, or perhaps only half aware of the storm he was about to unleash upon the eternal city. But as the sun set over the hills of Syria, bathing the temple in molten gold, one could already hear the distant echoes of dissent, the soft hiss of plotting, and the first faint stirrings of a scandal that would come to define a reign remembered for both divine ambition and human folly. The boy emperor had ascended, But the city of Rome had yet to learn the meaning of his devotion, or the cost of it.
The sun rose over the Adriatic horizon, casting a pale, tremulous light across the marble columns of Antioch. The city stirred with a restless energy, whispers of rebellion mixing with the scent of burning oil lamps and the tang of salt from the nearby sea. Elagabalus, barely 15, sat in the cool shadow of the basilica, his gaze fixed on a ledger, the meticulous strokes of his tutor Gannus still fresh in his mind. Every letter in that parchment carried weight, not just numbers, but destinies. Soldiers' loyalties, senators' favors, even the breath of Rome itself. His grandmother, Julia Mesa, moved like a shadow across the courtyard, her eyes sharp, calculating. She had crafted this moment with the patience of a serpent coiling for the kill. "Remember, child," she whispered, "they will not bend willingly. They will test your resolve, your courage, your divinity." Her voice, though soft, cut through the cool morning air like a blade. Elagabalus nodded, his small hands clutching the biatil, the black stone that embodied his god, Elagabal. It was heavy, not in weight, but in expectation. Across the plains, the 3rd Legion Gallica marched in formation, their boots drumming a rhythmic cadence that seemed to echo against the very stones of history. Soldiers murmured Caracalla's name, some out of loyalty, others out of greed or fear. And then the rumors Julia Mesa had seeded took root. The boy before them was not merely a prince, he was the son of Caracalla himself, a living link to a deified emperor. The legionaries exchanged uneasy glances, a subtle tension that could unravel at the slightest spark. By the time the sun had climbed higher, the Battle of Antioch began. Dust rose in suffocating clouds, the metallic tang of blood hanging faintly in the air. Arrows whistled through the sky like the shriek of vengeful spirits, and the cries of men, some in pain, some in triumph, formed a discordant symphony of chaos. Gannus, once a shadow behind the throne, now stood at Elagabalus's side, guiding strategy with a calculated precision that belied the youth of his charge. And then it happened. The Praetorian officers sent to suppress the rebellion turned their swords against their own men, siding with Elagabalus. The tide shifted in an instant, leaving Macrinus to flee, his plans unraveling like frayed silk. When the dust settled, the battlefield was a tableau of ruin and victory. The severed head of Ulpius Julianus, once loyal to Macrinus, was presented as a grim token of defiance. The message was clear. Power had changed hands, and Rome itself was about to feel the tremors of a new order. Elagabalus, crowned in spirit, if not yet in city, sent missives to the Senate, each word measured, each sentence a dance between submission and assertion. Amnesty was offered, but not generosity. Control, subtle and absolute, coursed through his lines. By the time he entered Rome, the city had already begun to whisper, the corridors of the Senate humming with curiosity and unease. Portraits of the boy emperor were rumored to hang above the goddess Victoria, forcing veneration through association. Coins bearing his mother and grandmother circulated alongside his own name, a careful choreography of image, faith, and bloodline. And in the Horti Spe Viteris, his villa on the Esquiline, Elagabalus began the careful cultivation of his domain. Gardens laid out with geometric precision, amphitheaters and hippodromes that would soon echo with the roar of chariots, a boy's playtime made imperial spectacle. Yet beneath the velvet and incense, beneath the glittering rituals and the exotic pageantry, unease festered. Senators whispered behind closed doors. The Praetorian Guard observed with cautious calculation. Even the people, beguiled by gifts and festival, could sense the strain, the tension threading every decree. Elagabalus, dressed in Eastern silks and crowned with his divinity, was both adored and reviled, a fragile flame threatening to consume itself. And amid the murmurs and candlelight, the young emperor began his religious revolution. The black stone of Elagabal, carried in a gilded chariot through Rome, drew awe and horror in equal measure. Senators watched, silent and pale, as their traditions were upended. Vestal virgins and priestesses bore witness to ceremonies that would scandalize the city, while the emperor danced backward before the chariot, a living conduit between heaven and earth, defying not only gravity but the weight of centuries-old law. The Roman elite bristled, the common people cheered, and Elagabalus, no longer merely a boy from Emesa, stood at the precipice of immortality or oblivion. His next moves, whispered in shadowed chambers, would decide not just the fate of a god, but the legacy of an empire. But even as the incense smoke curled into the pale moonlight, there were those plotting in silence, their knives sharpened not by anger, but by necessity. The Praetorian Guard, once faithful, now weighed their loyalties, and in the cold night of the Palatine, Julia Mace's eyes flickered with both pride and dread. The city would not long tolerate the unnatural rise of a boy whose god demanded more than tradition allowed. The stage was set, and the game of power was about to turn deadly.
The Palatine Hill was alive with the soft rustle of silk robes and the faint metallic tinkle of jewelry, a gentle music that belied the tension simmering beneath Rome's gilded surface. Elagabalus, now fully enthroned in the public eye, moved like a shadow across the mosaic floors of his imperial palace. Each step was deliberate, each gesture calculated, a performance as much for the people as for the gods he claimed to serve. The black stone of Elagabal had become the centerpiece of his court, carried in gilded chariots through the forum, through streets thronged with a curious, uneasy populace. Senators and patricians observed in rigid silence, their faces masks of decorum, while their minds spun webs of conspiracy. The Praetorian Guard, once mere instruments of protection, now navigated the shifting allegiances of a boy emperors whose whims could exalt or destroy them. Elagabalus's fascination with the exotic, the sacred, and the forbidden grew by the day. Eastern rituals replaced Roman rites. Gods of distant lands were honored alongside, or above, the old deities. Vestal virgins and priests found themselves coerced into ceremonies that scandalized the city, while the emperor reveled in spectacles of decadence that blurred lines between devotion and debauchery. Gold, perfume, and incense filled the air, masking the undercurrent of fear and resentment that crept through the streets like a persistent shadow. Among the elite, murmurs of rebellion began to solidify into schemes. Senators conspired in whispering corridors, plotting to remove what they called a boy god from the throne. Even within the Praetorian Guard, loyalties fractured. Some were captivated by Elagabalus's charisma, some terrified by his unpredictability, and some quietly sharpened knives in preparation for the inevitable. Julia Massa watched all of it, her sharp mind parsing threats, opportunities, and loyalties with surgical precision. She had placed him on the throne, but even she could not entirely control the wild flame she had ignited. Meanwhile, the emperor's personal indulgences grew more audacious. Exotic animals roamed the gardens, lavish banquets stretched through the night. Performances of dancers, musicians, and foreign priestesses became elaborate rituals, blurring sacred devotion with sensual spectacle. Elagabalus himself often appeared adorned in silks and veils, taking pleasure in shocking the crowd, playing roles both divine and absurd. His acts of transgression, whether marrying men, taking multiple wives, or dressing as a goddess, struck terror into the Roman aristocracy while captivating the plebeians with their audacity. But Rome is patient only so long.
The tension reached its breaking point when Elagabalus appointed unworthy favorites to positions of immense power, alienating even his most loyal advisors. Famine, plague, and political mismanagement gnawed at the empire's edges, while the city buzzed with discontent masked by festival and feasts. The Praetorian Guard, sensing that loyalty to the emperor now carried more risk than reward, began plotting with his cousin, Alexander Severus, whose measured demeanor contrasted sharply with Elagabalus's extravagance. It was in the dead of night that betrayal struck. The young emperor, surrounded by his closest attendants and loyalists, was lured from the safety of his chambers under false pretenses. Julia Massa, watching from her hidden vantage point, realized too late that the flame she had nurtured had grown too wild. The conspirators, a mix of praetorians and senators, descended with knives and swords. In the shadows of the palace, screams mingled with the clashing of steel. Elagabalus's lifeblood spilled onto the marble floors, a shocking contrast to the beauty and opulence that had defined his reign. By dawn, the city awoke to the news. The boy god had fallen. His black stone removed from its place of reverence, the grand ceremonies halted, and the empire left to grapple with the chaos his reign both created and exposed. Alexander Severus assumed control, bringing a measure of order, but the memory of Elagabalus lingered, a cautionary tale of ambition, divinity, and human fragility. The lessons of his brief reign were whispered for generations, that absolute power in the hands of the untested could inflame both devotion and hatred, that the gods themselves could be invoked to justify excess, and that Rome, vast and enduring, could survive even the most audacious of emperors, but not without scars. The black stone returned to Immis, the city of his birth, while the marble halls of the Palatine remained silent, echoing only with the ghosts of silk, incense, and the laughter of a boy who dared to challenge both tradition and time.